The future has arrived. As the world and humanity itself moves faster and faster into unimaginable possibilities, old institutions that built connection and shaped our sense of meaning are falling by the wayside. In their wake, profound questions about ethics, our purpose, and spirituality demand new answers. Join your host, Scott Mason, in Season 2 of the Purpose Highway podcast. We will explore how these social changes will revolutionize our society. We will learn how they impact our own search for connection and meaning. And we will hear stories of influencers whose lives have had radical change from the inside and found profound connection to others and themselves through a new definition of meaning. The future has arrived. Are you ready?
When you're racing down the Purpose Highway, we want to make sure you're healthy and happy every step of the way. That's why we're proud to partner with It's NOLA, 21st century plant-based healthy granola snack bites made with real ingredients and audacious flavor. It's NOLA crafts small batch hand-rolled granola balls that are vegan, gluten-free, and naturally low in sugar. Locally made in Brooklyn, It's NOLA's delightful bites come in 3 flavors: luscious cranberry coconut, sassy mango masala, and dark, decadent, chewy chocolate. It's NOLA is available to both individual customers and for wholesale accounts at itsnola.com. That's itsnola.com. Guests on this show are already enjoying this delicious snack. Check out It's NOLA's website for yourself and find out how good it is. Hello, everybody. It is Scott Mason revving up for another race down the Purpose Highway. If you like what we're doing, be sure to subscribe and give us a thumbs up on YouTube or a review on Apple. And sitting next to me today in the front seat is Phil Zuckerman. Phil is a professor of sociology and secular studies at Pitzer College. He serves as the special series editor of the Secular Studies book series published by NYU Press. He is the executive director of Humanist Global Charity, which works in 51 nations to fund secular education, humanist students, women's collectives, orphans, helplines, and offers internships in Africa and India development. Phil is on the editorial board of Secularism and Non-Religion. He is the author of 7 books, and his works have been translated into 6 languages. One of these books, called Living the Secular Life, was designated a best book of 2014 by Publishers Weekly, which is blow you away impressive. Oh, I am tired after saying all that, but Phil, welcome to the show. It is so good to have you. And let me just start by asking, after hearing that bio of yourself read, do you feel like a god?
I do, but if that were the case, then I couldn't believe that I existed. So that would be quite a paradox and a conundrum.
But it would make very, very interesting conversation.
I would rather be like an avatar of God. They have more fun. I always liked Pan, like he was sort of like a child of Zeus and a goat or something. So
totally. Well, we'll have a whole.
I worship him daily.
Oh my! I love Pan. I love Pan. My favorite, by the way, was Helios, but we'll have another conversation about that one day.
Helios.
I love that you even know who that is.
Sun god.
Let's get right to the point. This Easter weekend, all weekends, Gallup published a poll showing that Americans' membership in houses of worship had dropped below 50% for the first time in Gallup's 80 years of tracking. This is down from a percentage that had been hovering in the 70s for decades. Many people found this piece of data shocking. Did you?
No, I found, well, the trend has been going that way for decades. So we know that rates of religious belonging, identification, even behaviors have been plummeting, at least since the 50s. So it wasn't a shock to me. And if anything, it was just cause for celebration, to be quite honest. I know that's.
We'll talk about that a lot more later.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this then. Do you see this downward shift changing in North America, or slowing, or decelerating, or accelerating?
It's been going strong, I would say, it started in the 50s. Back in the 1950s, when you asked Americans, what religion are you? And you gave them all kinds of options to pick from, only about 4% said none of the above. In other words, Only about 4% said none of these religions am I going to associate with or identify with. Now, and that got up, in around 2000, it was still hovering around 10, 15%. And that was like headline news. I remember, I think in early 2000s, USA Today was like, whoa, 14% of Americans say they don't belong to a religion. Now it's closer to 30%. 25-30% nationally, and among younger Americans, so Americans between 18 and 30, it's at 40%. So we've been tracking this for at least 10 years. I take that back. We have the data going back from the 50s, but we've been more aware of it and more conscientious about it and conscious of it for the last decade or so. So no, I was not surprised, and the numbers keep going down and down and down.
Do you see this trend happening in other parts of the world? And we'll leave aside Scandinavia, Japan, places like that, but other regions of the world that have had a similarly hefty history of religiosity as has the United States.
You bet. So you see similar patterns in the Anglophone world. So not just the United States, but Canada, Australia, New Zealand. They're even a little bit more dramatic than we've had here in the United States. And you already mentioned parts of Asia. So Japan has seen this similar, even more dramatic. South Korea, even more dramatic. I would say the real interesting stuff is Latin America. So not as strong, but we are seeing a decline of religiosity in Mexico. It's very Uruguay, Chile, Argentina, even Brazil, which is extremely religious, is still seeing some small erosion that we've never seen before. We're seeing erosion of religion in certain parts of the Muslim and Arab world as well. Parts of Tunisia I've seen data on. Morocco I've seen data on. Libya. Also Iran, people are fed up. Iraq, people are fed up with a lot of the religious and sort of dictatorship, working hand in hand. And of course, as you mentioned, Scandinavia and all of Europe. So there are some parts of the world that are not seeing such rapid decline. There are some parts of the world that have even seen a slight uptick. So you're seeing a slight uptick of religiosity in Israel, a slight uptick of religiosity in many of the former Soviet nations. And then there's some countries that we just can't really speak to because they're dictatorships. Either they're religious dictatorships, in which case people don't want to admit that they're non-religious because they're going to get in trouble, or they're secular dictatorships where like Vietnam or China, where people don't want to admit they're religious or they'll get in trouble. So all dictatorships, be they religious or secular, you have to kind of put aside as hard to get valid data on.
Religion has been with humanity since prehistory as a near universal. In fact, there's even evidence of religiosity that has been found in fossilized records of non-Homo sapiens hominids. In light of this, I see this shift as truly of historical magnitude. Do you?
More. Thank you. Yes. It is. People have said to me when I've given talks about, the decline of religiosity in Europe or the United States or other parts of the world, sometimes people will raise their hand and they'll say, well, aren't these things kind of cyclical? Like, okay, they kind of go down and then they swing up again. And I say, there has never been a time in the history of humanity where we have seen a decline of religion like this. So it might be cyclical. I don't know. Maybe in 100 years, we're going to all be Mormon. I don't know. But no, there isn't this kind of boom and bust cycle to religiosity. We've never seen anything like this. In fact, for the first time in recorded history and pre-recorded history, we now have some societies where the majority of people are non-religious. That's unheard of. I mean, truly unheard of. Scotland has a majority of people who are non-religious. Estonia has a majority of people who are non-religious. Czech Republic has a majority of people who are non-religious. Japan has a majority. I mean, this is truly staggering. Possibly, places like Vietnam, but again, it's hard to know. Netherlands, I mean, I'm just off the top of my head. So, it's only a handful of countries, but still, it is historically unprecedented.
I appreciate you saying that, because really looking at the major intellectual or cultural revolutions in history, agricultural revolution, the movement into cities.
That's right.
Industrial revolution,
That's right.
Technological revolution, even the invention of religion as a bureaucratized entity. These are things that have shaped humanity and reverberated in ways that are so enormous. It's hard for us to even truly grasp. I see the potential for this, what we're living through now, as every bit as significant, depending on what we do with it. Thoughts?
Amen. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Religion has infused every aspect of civilization, are the stories we tell, many of the laws that have been created, gender norms, sex norms, art, architecture. It's hard to fathom how much religion and different aspects of religion have permeated and touched and shaped so much. So I would agree with you that right now this decline of religion is monumental historically. And I would also agree with you that it is not necessarily a good or bad thing. As you said, it depends what we do with it. In other words, I think there are some secularists who make two mistakes. They think that religion is all bad, which it isn't. There's good, there's bad parts about religion, and there's good parts about religion. Religion was created by people. It's part of human culture. So there's all the good in human culture is in religion, and all the bad in human culture is also in religion, right? Then the second mistake they make is they think if religion goes away, all our problems will be solved. I mean, there'll be no more sexism or racism or homophobia or brutal, capitalist exploitation or environmental destruction. Well, that's not true. We've seen aggressively atheistic governments wreak havoc, destroy the world, torture people, kill people. So just because you're not religious anymore doesn't necessarily guarantee you're going to be moral or ethical. I think there's a strong tendency to be. In fact, I think religion is not the guarantor of morality that people mistake it to be. But I think if we take this change and we advocate a kind of secular humanism where we try to alleviate suffering for the sake of alleviating suffering, no other reason. We're not trying to get bonus points with a magical deity or get into heaven. We're trying to alleviate suffering because we understand it's wrong. Then I think this decline of religion can be very, very beneficial. I think it will improve many aspects, which I'm happy to get into time permitting. But you're right, there's no guarantee, and it kind of depends what we do with it, how we choose to live.
There are those who argue that religion, whether actually true or not, is a fundamental part of our cultural DNA and absorbed into our personal outlooks due to evolutionary factors. Just aren't going away. How do you square away that argument with what we're observing?
Yeah, I don't buy it because, let me rephrase that. I definitely agree that in our evolutionary history, there were traits or practices that could be beneficial and ensure greater generational success and greater reproductive success. No question about it. So I agree, for example, that synchronized dancing helped group cohesion. And we can observe that today. We can even measure it. When people dance in a synchronized way, they become more empathetic with each other just by body movement. So there's no question that if people tell certain stories, it can increase morality. There's many things that we have started to do have been doing for hundreds of thousands of years that were evolutionary and advantageous. And I agree that aspects of religion probably played a role in that. Symbols that we could identify readily, symbols that could enhance group cohesion, ceremonies and rituals that could advance group cohesion, stories that could make people act certain ways. So yes, I agree with that. The reason I don't think it's embedded, though, to the degree that people mistake it for is very simple. It's very simple. When children are not raised religiously, in other words, they're not taught to believe the religion by their parents. They're not taught by their grandparents. They're not sent to Sunday school or Catholic school or Jewish school or Muslim school. When they are not raised or socialized with religion, 89% of them grow up to be secular in one generation. Right.
Really?
So and not only that, you can see the data. We have longitudinal data of multiple generations. So when you have two parents who are of the same religion, the likelihood that the child will be that same religion is like 95%. If you have two parents, one is one religion and one's a different religion, they're both religious, the likelihood that that child will be religious goes down a little bit to around 75%. If you have one parent who's secular and one parent who's religious, now only 50% of those kids are going to end up religious as adults. And if both the parents are non-religious and raise the kid with that religion, 85% of those kids go on to be secular. So if it's encoded in our DNA, that's some pretty easy shit to get rid of, because it just takes one fucking generation to wipe that shit out. So there's no question to me that, yes, as a species that has evolved, religion has been adaptive in many ways and probably reproductively advantageous in many ways. Heck, if your God tells you to never use birth control, you're going to pump out more babies. But the engine that keeps religion going generation after generation is socialization. It's being taught from a very early age by the people that love you that these things are true, that this is what our identity is, this is what we do, and it just takes.
So I got to ask you then, you opened the door, now you're going to have to walk, Mr. Zuckerman. Were you raised in a religious household?
So yes and no. So when we talk about religion or being religious, what do we even mean? And as a social scientist, I need to have a way to measure that. So the way I employ, and many of my colleagues do, is what we call the 3 Bs. When it comes to religion, we can talk about the 3 Bs: belief, behavior, and belonging. And these are sort of 3 aspects of religiosity. Some people are religious in all 3 ways, some in 2, some in 1. Depends on the tradition, depends on your culture, depends on where in history you live, what time in your life you happen to be asking. So belief in supernatural things, that's what makes religion. Behaviors that you do in relation to that: rites, rituals, ceremonies, holidays, body modification, fasting, feasting, etc., etc. And then belonging, that just has to do kind of with identity. Do you see yourself as belonging to a tradition that is related to the other 2 Bs somehow? So you may not believe, but you might belong, or you may belong but not believe, and so on and so forth. In some religions, behavior is everything. The ritual is 90% of it, and beliefs no one really talks about. In other religions, it's all about belief. I mean, I've had so many Christians say to me, are you saved? I don't care what you do. I don't care how you identify. Do you have a personal relation with Jesus Christ? And that's all that matters, blah, blah, blah. So I was raised with 2 of the Bs, but not 1. So I was raised belonging. I belonged to an ethnic refugee Jewish community. All 4 of my grandparents fled Europe. Many of their relatives were killed in the Holocaust. I grew up in a small Jewish enclave in LA where we belonged to the synagogue because that's what you did. In terms of behaviors, we did a lot of Jewish rituals, holidays, celebrations, food. I also attended Episcopalian summer camp as a camper and a counselor. I enjoyed it, so I sang some Christian songs and did some Christian prayers or whatnot. The belief I never had. I'm a 3rd-generation atheist agnostic. All 4 of my grandparents were non-believers of various shades and hues. My parents were non-believers, so I was never raised being told there was a God, being told that prayers were an effective way to deal with your problems, being told that, there's a heaven or a hell. Never. So I was raised with some religion, ceremonies, holidays, ritual, community, but no belief.
Were you ever tempted by belief, if I may use that term?
Oh, sure. Let's see. I remember when I was a kid, the reason I mentioned Pan was I got the Delari's Book of Greek Myths. I loved it.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we're best friends now.
It's the most beautiful book.
Incredible. That changed my life.
Yeah, I pored over that thing for years. So I desperately, whenever we went camping, I would go in the woods and try to pray to these gods and pray to Zeus. I'd beg for a sign. They never did shit for me, so I eventually dropped that one. I remember one time I was driving home. I was working a night. I had a job at night. I was teaching a night at a community college at night, and I had a long commute home, and there was no freeway, and you were on baseline road. And I would get out at 10 o'clock at night. I'd be exhausted. I just want to get home to my wife and baby. And I would, and if you got each red light, it could take forever. But if you got the green light, you just zoomed home because each light was timed and you just got the green light the whole way. So I remember one time I'm going to pray to Pan. I'm going to pray to Pan. I'm like, Pan, if you give me these green lights, I'm going to be your new disciple. I'm going to revitalize your worship. I'm going to get people to follow you. And of course I hit the first red light. And the first thing I did when that happened was this is really interesting. My mind immediately said, oh, Pan probably knows that there's a drunk driver, half a mile down the road. So he gave me that red light to save my life. And that was one of the most illuminating experiences I ever had because it helped me understand how religion functions. People need to feel that they're being loved and protected by some magical thing, and they'll use pretzel logic to get there. So they'll pray to God for help, and if they don't get that help, they'll immediately say, well, God is really helping me just in ways I don't know. So it's a heads I win, tails you lose way, and hey, if it comforts people, bless them. Now, later in life, I had serious issues. I had a fever for 7 weeks that they couldn't identify. They thought maybe I had lymphoma. I thought I was going to die. I felt horrible. I couldn't pray because I didn't think there was anyone to pray to. So even if I wanted to believe, it didn't make sense. My wife had a near-death stroke that decimated her. No one to pray to. I don't believe there's a magical, invisible deity. That it just doesn't add up. So belief and faith are not things you can will, right? This is what I would say to anybody who thinks you can choose it, right? If I said to you right now, if you can honestly, truly believe that penguins can float and shit, pineapple poop, and you honestly believe that there will be peace on earth tomorrow, could you get yourself to really believe it? And you can't fake belief. You can't pretend. Do you really believe that penguins float in the air and poop pineapple and can speak Persian dialect of French? No. Even if you wanted what it could offer, that's how I am about God. I just don't believe there's a magical, invisible being who exists. If there is, oh well, I don't believe. Sorry, that's where I'm at.
First of all, I'm going to give another shout out to Delaire's Book of Greek Myths because I just feel so bonded with you because you said that. And I've got to ask, did you ever read the Book of Norse Myths that they had?
That was going to be my follow-up question. I mean, we are together. I got that later in life. Yeah. I didn't even know it existed, but we found it about 10 years ago. And I was so happy. But did you have that one as well?
Oh, it changed my life.
Wow.
Freya and the cats, Thor. Oh my God.
I love Freya.
Totally. She's the best. Shout out to the Delaires. If anyone ever wants to know more about them, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I will share that information. And then I also just want to share a story about your relationship with Pan.
Okay.
I am a New Yorker. And so it is no surprise that I actually knew someone who decided to form a small cult to the goddess of parking spaces. And he told me that once he and his friends began to pray to her, now, they didn't tell me about her until many years later, and they ditched her by that point, but because they were riding the subway. But they said they began to mysteriously find parking spaces. And that goes almost as to what you were saying. And he said, we actually began to almost believe her, except we knew we had just invented her.
Isn't that interesting?
Despite declining religiosity and the high visibility of new atheists and other very aggressive atheistic leaders in the public sphere, let's face it, there's one thing that Obama and Donald Trump had in common, and that was that they had to present themselves as religious in order to get elected.
No question about it.
Changing mores around religiosity. Discrimination against people who are secular. A non-sectarian constitution in the United States. What's going on here?
And there's a lot there. Let me see if I can succinctly respond. So, first of all, thank you for reminding our viewers that the United States embarked on a really bold experiment. We were the first nation on earth to not want government and religion to be one, to separate those out, so that the first sentence of the First Amendment is Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That comes before freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, right to bear arms. It is the first sentence of the First Amendment. So, and Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter saying that what that meant was erecting a wall of separation between church and state. That's Thomas Jefferson's words, not Karl Marx's. So that is embedded in our Constitution. It's fascinating. And the framers did not want people to, there's more too. We made it a law that there could be no religious test to hold office. There's other laws as well that make it, and in fact, our Constitution never refers to God or Jesus, other than in the date. It says, like, this is the date in the year of our Lord, but that's not the body of the Constitution. That's just the date up at the right-hand corner. So yes, we have a godless Constitution. Our laws are all authorities put in we the people. Talk about a secular foundation for a nation. All authority is in we the people, not in Jesus or Allah. Okay. That said, the great irony or the great paradox is, now you fast forward over 200 years, our society is culturally very Christian, Protestant Christian, and many Americans see religion as, part of being American. In fact, our original motto, the nation's motto was E pluribus unum, out of many, one. It was changed to In God We Trust in the 1950s to distinguish us from the godless communists. Our money never had God on it until the 1950s. You can go look at old quarters, old dollar bills. It does not say In God We Trust. Our Pledge of Allegiance didn't say under God. Our original Pledge of Allegiance was one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And in the 1950s, they inserted under God. So those are all late additions, but they speak to the self-conception that many Americans have that it's God and country. Jesus and the Stars and Stripes are one. And so what that means in reality is, to be secular is to be suspected, to be seen as immoral. To be an atheist is seen to be immoral, unethical. You're not a real American. You're not even a good person. How can you be moral if you're an atheist? And so any politician who wants to succeed has to don the cloak of faith, even if, or keep their secularity concealed. I like to point to Barney Frank. Barney Frank was one of the most effective and powerful members of Congress for decades in this country, congressman from Massachusetts. Barney Frank was A, Jewish. Number two, came out as gay in the 80s, right? Yeah. The 80s, not now when the Supreme Court says, gays and lesbians can marry. I mean, so much has changed. And yet would never come out as a non-believer. Now, do I believe that non-believers face anything like the kind of persecution and violence that gays and lesbians or other minorities? No, not even close. But there's something about our politics which says you can be a presidential candidate and be Mormon. You can be a presidential candidate and be gay. You can be a presidential candidate and be a woman, African American. But if you're an atheist, no fucking way. Now, the times are changing though. For the first time in history, we have a free thought caucus in Congress. That emerged only a couple years ago. So we have secular Congress people who, there's about 14 or 15 of them, who have put their faces and their names on this organization. None of them call themselves atheists. They call themselves non-religious or humanists or whatnot. But so it is changing a little bit. But you're right. If you see surveys, so something is going on here. I think it has to do with the history of our country, the history of the founding of the country, the history of who immigrated here, our long Cold War with the Soviet Union, which was aggressively atheistic. And one way we distinguished ourselves from that was by being Christians and so on and so forth. But I think it's fading. I think more and more people are realizing that they have a friend or a neighbor or a brother or a sister or a spouse who's a non-believer. And as the numbers go, and let's face it, when Donald Trump held up that Bible in front of that church during a riot, He did more damage to Christianity in this country than all the angry atheists combined could ever dream of doing. I mean, young people saw that and they're like, if that's the defender of the faith, if that's Christianity, if Kellyanne Conway is Christianity, if all these people, if Laura Ingraham is Christianity, if Ben Carson is Christianity, if Betsy DeVos is Christianity, we're out of here. And that's what's happening.
Well, it is interesting. So I'm a member of the LGBTQ community, and I remember when I was a kid, even though I'm only 26, back in the 80s, right. I remember thinking that if full-scale LGBTQ rights ever emerged into the United States' social and legal fabric, it would actually be the end of religion in this country. And the reason I thought that in my innocent little mind was that the arguments against LGBTQ rights had been so closely tied to Bible verses that if the LGBTQ community was able to puncture that, then the whole balloon would burst, because there'd be no reason to make an exception for those biblical dictates as opposed to every other one.
Right.
And so the question that I have for you about that is that you've touched on a little bit is the emergence of the LGBTQ movement, the Republican alignment with the religious right. Google is something else I'm sure will come up, as well as some other things that you discussed in your book, Society Without God, which was initially what turned me on and made me feel I had to have you as a guest. Those are causes of this change, correlation. I was really surprised at the end of Society Without God, where you talked about some factors that had been correlated with, in Scandinavia, the decline in religiosity. Emergence of women into the workforce, for instance, was a shocker. Or the existence of state-sponsored religions, which didn't exactly help their own cause. But talk to me a little bit about what your current thinking is about what some of these causes are, so we can understand
what's causing this secularization.
Yes, particularly in North America, but elsewhere.
So the biggest factors are, so there's kind of universal factors, meaning if these occur anywhere, they're going to have a secularizing effect. And then there's nation-specific or particular historical factors that may occur in the United States, but not necessarily in Chile or Vietnam or whatever. So the biggies are, increased education, increased prosperity, always leads to levels or degrees of secularization. So the more people can read and write and have scientific literacy but reading even more, just basic literacy opens up the world. And when people have enough food and shelter, and when there's enough of what is needed in life, so life isn't so precarious, isn't so there's not too much scarcity or disease. So when societies become better educated and more prosperous and more, and that prosperity is shared to a greater degree, and people have access to housing and healthcare and food and medicine, then religiosity tends to go down wherever on planet Earth that occurs. In the United States, you've got these factors here. So number one, you've got the Catholic pedophile priest scandal, which turned off a lot of Catholics when they realized the extent of the crimes and the cover-ups of those crimes. So much for religion guaranteeing morality. Hello. I mean, the largest pedophile rapist ring. It's so funny, like QAnon, they're like, QAnon's like, did you know the Clintons are overseeing a pedophile scandal? It's like, there's no data for that. If you're upset about pedophile scandals, the Catholic Church, we got the data, we got the emails, we've got the witnesses, we've got the victims. Okay, so there's that. That has turned off a lot of Catholics. The Christian right, which you already mentioned, has turned off so many middle-of-the-road Christians. The Christian right aligning itself Christianity, and evangelical Christianity in particular, aligning itself so strongly with the conservative ring of the Republican Party, has turned off so many mainline Christians, middle-of-the-road Christians, who are like, I don't want to be identified with Ann Coulter. If she's always wearing that crucifix, I'm out of here. So, and a corollary of that is the gay rights movement. As you said, the only organized anti-gay rights movement in this country are religious people. Whether it's the Mormon Church, whether it's Orthodox Jews, whether it's certain evangelical Christians, whether it's the black church, there is Are there homophobic secular people? Of course, but they're not organized. They don't donate. They don't have leaders. They don't wage campaigns. So they're just maybe individual secular people that happen to have different levels of homophobia in them, internalized or whatever. But the only organized, active, politically, financially active are religious groups. And young people have taken note. And they've said, what the fuck? This is ridiculous. And so then you have more women working in the paid labor force. In the 50s, about 14% of homes were led by a female breadwinner or had only a female breadwinner. Mm-hmm. Today, it's up to 42% of all U.S. households have a woman as either the sole breadwinner or the larger breadwinner.
But that was interesting in particular when you examined why that might be, because you didn't say the mere presence of women in the workplace suddenly just makes people not be religious anymore. There was a specific reason why you felt there was a correlation between that and an increase in secularity. Talk to us a little bit about that.
I would say there's two biggies. So the first one, which you're probably referring to, is we know from anthropological research and sociological research and psychological research that women tend to take on the role of socializing children into religion at home. If you think about The Simpsons, the mom is always schlepping the family to church. Mm-hmm. Homer never wants to go to church. He wants to sleep in. He wants to watch the football game. That is an accurate reflection of what happens in most homes. Not all, but in most homes, it's the women that are getting kids to say the prayers at night. It's the women that are getting the kids to the Hebrew school or the...
I've got to admit, that was the case in my family, yeah.
And so what they say is, it's just a basic, once women start working in the paid labor force, they're tired. They've got other things to do. They no longer have the energy or maybe the motivation to keep grinding that wheel. And so what happens is they start to ease up on the socialization of children. The husbands don't step up. They're like, cool. And then the kids are less socialized in religion. Mm. That's probably the main reason. I think a secondary corollary factor is that when you're in the paid labor force, you have more agency in life. You're getting money in your pocket, and that money allows you to have a little bit more freedom, a little bit more say in how you want to live, where you want to live, what you want to do. And that agency, I think, reduces the need for religion. If you don't have control over your life, you're going to turn towards religion. There's no question about it. When you feel that you are, whatever way the wind blows, whatever job your husband gets, if he's moving here, he's moving there, if he's leaving, or, if you feel like you've got no opportunities for education, no opportunities to better yourself, of course you're going to turn to church. You're going to turn to God for comfort. You're going to turn for Jesus as an imaginary friend, and you're going to turn to church for community, for childcare, for groceries, for, camaraderie. But if you're working in the paid labor force, you're going to feel a sense of responsibility, increased agency, increased empowerment, and the need for religion is going to go down.
Do you have any thoughts as to why a religious left has never really emerged to fill some of the vacuum that has been taken in by these nuns?
That's an interesting question. My first one is, there have been two that I can think of, three strong religious lefts that immediately come to mind. So number one would be the Black church. So the civil rights movement, what happened in the South was part and parcel of Black church culture. The phone trees, the coordinating of carpools. The Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott was planned at church, facilitated by churches. So the Black church has always been a force, I think, for progressive leftist causes, even today. This is why, when that senator the guy who ran for Senate, I believe it was in Georgia, Warnock, African-American preacher, I was like, yeah, go for it, because I love this politics.
Right.
Loves the Bible, whatever. Martin Luther King loved the Bible. Great. I love his agenda. Okay. Also, there's been a strong tradition in the Catholic Church of a kind of workers, leftist, Catholic Church movement that has been very progressive. I think it's dwindled because of secularization, but it's still there. And of course, Jews, they're not strong believers, but Jews tend to be very progressive as well. Although the more religious they are, the more right-leaning they get, which is an interesting, you see that across the board. The more religious, you see it in India, you see it in, whether it's Hindus, Mormons, the more religious they get, the more right-wing they get. But I agree with you that we talk about the Christian right as this powerful entity that politicians are afraid of, that city councils are afraid of, that school boards are. I mean, they wield so much media power. They wield so much voter power. They controlled our White House for the last 4 years. So why isn't there a similar, I guess, what you were saying, like religious left that people see as this strong, powerful movement? And I'm going to say, I think it has to do with the kind of, partly with the kind of personalities that, in other words, strong religiosity is very authoritarian. It's about obedience. Mm-hmm. It's about giving up your own conscience and just following the rules, listening to leaders. It's about groupthink. It's not about democracy. That strong religion, there's never been a democracy vibe in strong religion. None of the great religions ever taught democracy. Not Judaism, not Christianity, not Islam.
Well, that is true. It's not a democracy of heaven, right? It's a kingdom of heaven.
And so the left is much more about democracy. It's much more about individual consciousness. It's much more about thinking for yourself and not obeying rules and not being authoritarian, and ambiguity. On the right, it's like clear cut. This is evil. This is good. The left is much more comfortable with ambiguity, understanding that morals and ethics are contextual, understanding that there are some things in life that are gray and not clear cut. So I think that by its very nature, left-wing politics doesn't lend itself to a strong political ideology, whereas religiosity does. They go hand in hand. You see it with Modi in India. You see it with Bolsonaro in Brazil throughout history.
Shifting a little bit, but not entirely unrelated. At the end of Society Without God, you talked about, that book involved interviews with many, many, many Danes and Swedes. You're left out in Norway, by the way.
I know.
I won't hold that against you. One of the things that you addressed was what their sense of community and meaning was like. And anyone that wants to read your book, and they should, will probably find this very interesting. I will summarize the feeling state that emerged within me as I read that chapter, and I would love to hear your response to that. The focus of the interviewee's universe, of their moral sphere, seemed very small. And one of the things that I remember, like family-based or the immediate community, one of the things that you said at the end, which Phil stabbed me like a knife in the heart, you made me cry and you didn't even know me, was that the search for meaning might just be led by a few angst-ridden people like me. Is it just me that found this depressing?
Yeah, it's a good question. Okay, so I guess what I would say about that search for meaning is, on the one hand, there's no question that it is a major part of the human experience. There's a reason that Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning is a international bestseller. Yeah. There's a reason that people are drawn to religious narratives and religious stories. Yes, I don't think there's a human being who has ever lived that at some point hasn't looked up at the stars and thought, what is this? Why am I here? What is it all about? And, why and how and what and at the heart of the philosophy of existentialism was, how do you create meaning in a godless universe? I mean, that's what Sartre basically said, that's what we're here for. And it's not easy. And it's pretty ugly. And there's a kind of angst that comes with that existential insight and even depression. So I agree with you that people are always searching for meaning, and they search for it in grand philosophical ways or mundane, physical, personal ways, whether it's in the food they eat or the shows they watch or the grand questions that they think. My point, however, was I think we overestimate that the chunk of our lives that actually occupies. So there are some of us, we tend to be highly educated or major in philosophy or whatever, and we sort of think that this is the most important thing, like meaning, finding meaning. But if you even think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like I think that if your search for meaning is a major part of your daily life, that means two things. One, you're just unusual and you just have a kind of search for meaning propensity that most don't have to such a degree, or all your needs are taken care of to such a degree that you don't have much else to think about. Most humans, I think, most of the time are thinking about the things that matter in their daily lives. Food, relationships, neighbors, job, kids, sex, the things that they can control or can't control but wish they could. And yes, every now and then they may think about what's the meaning of it all, but I think for most people those are fleeting moments that doesn't shape they don't suddenly drop everything and shape their lives around that. Some people do, and they go on a vision quest, or they drop everything and search for life's great meaning, and we have many examples of that, but I think they're the exception, not the norm, if that makes sense.
That being said, great things have been accomplished because leaders of organizations, usually, have persuaded people to attach themselves to the meaning-driven activity that they are engaged in.
Yeah.
And so a question I have for you is, if we are moving into a state where the search for meaning, or in which we accept that only a limited number of people are going to really engage in that, is that a society where great things can even be accomplished?
Well, I think that's how it's been. I think in most of history, there have been certain people who have either had the gumption or the chutzpah or the passion to take on leadership roles and make these great things happen. So I don't think we can all do that all the time. So yeah, I think that it will still occur. But, I go back to the thing you just said, what you said 20 minutes ago or so, when you said, if this is a great change in history, is the outcome going to be good or bad? It depends what we do with it. Yeah. I would say that you could say the same thing about this attachment of meaning. Great leaders have whipped up their followers to commit themselves to the nation or the flag and wage war. So you can get people to find meaning in chauvinism, in nationalism, in racism. I mean, think about, I was watching John Brown, that new John Brown show, Good Lord Bird, the other night, and John Brown at one point said to his sons, I'm so glad I found a cause that I'm willing to die for. He wanted to end slavery. Wow, yes. That's amazing. But he says, the people I'm against, I think they're wrong, but they're willing to die for their cause too. So people found meaning in abolishing slavery. People found meaning in upholding slavery. So just a kind of passionate search for meaning can serve ill or good. It depends how it's channeled.
A search for meaning and a religion, though, can provide an ethical framework.
Absolutely.
And one question that many people may secretly ask themselves, so I'll just throw it out here because that's what I'm here to do, and we might as well keep it real. Are most people even capable of developing a meaningful ethical framework that they can apply without someone telling them what it is? The cynic would say that's what religion does. Most people just can't do it. Mm-hmm. Religion does it. And so without religion, you have a society operating without anyone telling people how to behave. We could run amok.
Yeah. It's a fallacy. The data doesn't uphold it. It's just not how it works. There's so many. I wrote a book called What It Means to Be Moral, and it's all about this.
Yep.
Go out and get it from the library. Where to begin? Okay, so first we have the sociological and historical evidence. So the nations today that are the least religious, the democracies that are the least religious, the least church-going, the least believing in God, are the safest and most ethical societies the world has ever known. They have the lowest murder rates, the lowest violent assault rates. They take care of the elderly, their children, they're sick to a degree unimaginable for most of human history. So that's the sociological evidence. In the United States, The states that have the lowest rates of church attendance, God belief, have the lowest murder rates, the lowest violent assault rates, the lowest poverty rates, the best health care, et cetera, et cetera. The states that have the highest God belief, the highest church attendance, et cetera, have the most violent crime rates. So the counties, you can do it by county. That's the sociological evidence. So clearly something's keeping people moral, and it's not religion. Next, historically, those societies that have seen the greatest waves of secularization, so societies that were very religious 300 years ago and are not religious today, have seen a decline in murder, a decline in hunger, a decline in poverty, a decline in violence, not an increase. So you can take the same society over time, the same city over time. Even in the United States, the last 30 years, we are at an all-time low of crime right now. In the last 40 years, we're at an all-time low of violent crime, property crime, and yet in the last 40 years, we've seen nothing but secularization. So it's not that secularization causes these things, but clearly it's not a threat or a danger. But that's just the sociology and history. Let me just quickly explain the psychology. Nobody as an adult decides, what morals am I going to live by? Who's going to teach me how to be moral? We learn how to be moral and ethical pre-verbally by the people that raise us. We are not taught how to be moral. We are socialized into morality. We learn it from the experiences we have from 0 to 10 by the people who care for us, who are around us, through example, through experience. It's only the odd person who at 18 or 28 is like, I don't know how to live. Is it wrong to shit in someone's couch? Is it wrong to rape? I guess I better find some rules to tell me. We are socialized as moral beings. It is through how we are raised. And the data is clear. Any human who is raised in a loving environment that is supportive, that is nurturing, that is consistent, that is calm, 99.9% of the time will become a moral and ethical human being. And any child who is raised in a violent, unloving, chaotic, horrid, unnurturing place will have their morality significantly compromised. End of story.
2 last questions. What do you think that ethics and spirituality will look like in North America 50 years from now?
Ooh.
Like to keep them easy.
That's a good one. I think fundamentalism will increase. I think as the planet gets hotter, I think as life gets more precarious because of the heating planet, people will turn to fundamentalism for comfort, for guidance, for strength, for tribalism. So I predict a bifurcation. You're going to have half the country dropping out of religion, becoming secular. You're going to have half the country becoming violent, fanatic fundamentalists. And we know which group likes to kill. It's the religious. So I am a little worried about this country in 50 years. That said, I am an optimist. So maybe, just maybe, as more and more people become secular, they will adopt humanistic worldviews, humanistic ethics, and they will make the world a better place by fighting climate change, getting everybody free universal health care like every other democracy on planet Earth has, better education, and maybe, just maybe, that will cause the fanatic fundamentalists to dwindle, and life will be better for more people. So, I don't know. Those are my 2 possibilities. That said, I don't think religion will ever disappear. I think it has too many functions. It serves too many of our needs and too many of our fundamental needs. And I think spirituality will always exist. So I do not see, nor would I want, a world without religion or spirituality.
Many people will be shocked to hear that.
It's true. I just lost a bunch of friends on Facebook.
Right. If I accomplished one thing in my life, that was it. Just kidding.
Yeah.
So going back to the Delaries to round out the hour.
Yes.
If you could go on any hero's journey in all of mythology, whose would it be?
Wow, man. That's interesting. I have to be Pan, man. I just, it speaks to me. I want the goat legs. I want to play that flute. I want to have, I'm not going to say, but if you look up Pan on the internet, most depictions of Pan in history and in art has a massive phallus. Just going to throw that out there. Fortunately, my daughter bought me one that didn't because I couldn't have this at work. He just speaks to me. So I know that he stole some goats from somebody didn't he steal a bunch of, he was a trickster. He was a prankster. I'm not much of a trickster or prankster, but I don't know. What about you? I'm curious.
I would say, my favorite god is Helios, but I've always thought that the journey of the Golden Fleece was inspiring.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. You know what's funny about Helios? Dolores screwed me up. I was in Mr. Smith's class in high school, and he was talking about, we were learning Greek mythology, and he said, now Apollo is the god of the sun. I said, no, he's not. That's Helios. No, Apollo's the god. Like, it's Helios.
It is. He was wrong.
And he was wrong, but somehow Apollo did get associated with the sun. I don't know why, but,
Apollo never cut it for me. He was kind of second.
I agree.
Phil, it has been great taking a ride with you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Scott.
How can people find you, by the way, real quick?
Just Google Phil Zuckerman. It'll take you to my wiki page. It'll take you to my books and videos. I'm off Twitter. I don't do Instagram. I know, and I'm probably going to get off Facebook too. It's just taking up too much of my time. Sorry, folks. I'm 52. I missed that train. But anyway, yeah.
Well, thank you for letting us know. And for everyone turning, whatever you're doing when you're listening to this show, if you like this episode, please be sure to subscribe and leave a review on Apple or a comment on YouTube like I mentioned at the top of the hour. And I will see you next time for another trip down the Purpose Highway. When you're racing down the Purpose Highway, we want to make sure you're healthy and happy every step of the way. That's why we're proud to partner with It's NOLA, 21st century plant-based healthy granola snack bites made with real ingredients and audacious flavor. It's NOLA crafts small batch hand-rolled granola balls that are vegan, gluten-free, and naturally low in sugar. Locally made in Brooklyn, It's NOLA's delightful bites come in 3 flavors: luscious cranberry coconut, sassy mango masala, and dark, decadent, chewy chocolate. It's NOLA is available to both individual customers and for wholesale accounts at itsnola.com. That's ITSNOLA.com. Guests on this show are already enjoying this delicious snack. Check out It's NOLA's website for yourself and find out how good it is.